This is the Pan African Leadership Center. Thank you all for listening. We are coming to you in a space of intellectual consciousness to elevate who we are as a people. We recognize that we are a Pan African people, that we are in the spirit of the late Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere. We are talking about being one people, and we are joined today by uh, my mother, sister, leader, inspiration, Dr. Paula Tendai Johnson. And today we're going to talk about the elements of ancestral commemoration and African elevation. So we will unpack that particular narrative. And so we just want to thank everyone for being committed to this activity of Pan African leadership. And thank you, everyone, for joining us all over the entire world where we find ourselves as African people. People are joining in from Nairobi, Kenya, from Uganda, from various places, and you'll be amazed at how we are joined to elevate who we are as a people. Uh, Mama Tendai, we have been in communication for a number of years. I want to thank you for all that you have done and the organization that DASI has done to keep me on this path, to keep me straight, to encourage me. And thank you for including me in the fold. So I know who you are, but I want to make sure that others know who you are. So please introduce yourself to those our listeners, our viewers, so that they can know more about Mama Tendai.
Well, that's one of the most difficult things to do, Bob, is to introduce yourself. And basically, I can say I've been around the tree stump quite a little bit. And if this is coming from Nairobi, the closest, I flew in my very first time going to Africa. We landed in Kenya, but they didn't allow us to get off the plane because I was on my way to Tanzania.
Hmm.
And that was my first experience. So my first experience was in Eastern Africa, rather than, as most people end up going to West Africa.
Mm.
And this was in the 80s, Baba. So when I when I wrote back to people and called and whatever, the thing I said to them was, I have died and gone to heaven. Everything I see is African. And I started listing all of the things that we don't have or didn't have in the United States at that time in terms of what African people were doing. So let's see. My experiences range from and actually when I was going at that time, it was to celebrate the 20-year union between the island of Zanzibar and the mainland of Tanganyika to form Tanzania. Now, how was I able to be there? Because I was one of the founders of the Julius King Nyerere Education Institute in New Brunswick, New Jersey at the time.
Wow.
And so we were invited, even though I had left and gone to work. Actually, I did a stint in corporate to understand computers and the computer revolution that I knew was going to take place as a means of being able to ensure that we as Africans were able to communicate with each other all across the globe. And I initially saw it as a means of being able to help, especially from the African countries that were freeing themselves, being able to quickly train people who had missed out on their formal education.
Hmm.
So I did spend a stint in Zimbabwe, basically looking at that and trying to establish computer education there. So let's see. So I've done that, and as assistant director of the Nyerere Education Institute. When I was in graduate school at the University of Minnesota studying the people and politics of Africa, I was in a PhD program, which I basically I quit the program to go start the Education Institute. But while I was there, we started the Association of Africans in Minnesota at the university because I found that there were only about 500 of us on the campus. And the University of Minnesota is the largest campus in the U.S. And there were these little pockets of all these different countries. Each one had their little group and nobody came together. So I pulled everybody together under one umbrella. And we did a number of things. At the time, I worked for a new town while I was also a teaching assistant, graduate assistant in the school. and I hired my students to,
Wow. Wow.
to work in the new town. And we created various kinds of programs,
Mm,
and we were moving forward. We raised money so that the people who were in school, who needed to go home, somebody passes at home, and students have to pack up and go home. So we had dues and everything else like that where we could support people if they had to return back to Africa to take care of some personal business and come back. So we did a number of those things. But now, with all the different little places where I went after I came out to the Jersey to start uh, Julius K. Nyerere Education Institute, then I worked in corporate in the computer industry for a few years. And then, let's see, what else did I do? Oh, so anyway, when I landed in DC, I again thought I had died and gone to heaven because there were so many different African centered organizations and schools. So my children went all the way through school, through Pan African School. And as a matter of fact, they didn't even have any European clothes until they got to college.
mm,
So yeah, so it was a supportive environment, as you well know, Baba, because there's everybody there, and then I found African spiritual systems there that I was able then to link into. So I had an African store uh,
mm,
at at one time, and then I left and went back into higher education in the '90s, and I
mm,
and I have been there since. I've always been an administrator, but I would teach African courses on the side. So I taught people in politics of Africa at Morgan State. I was at Coppin at the time as an administrator, director of institutional research, but I would teach Introduction to Africa and the African Diaspora at
mm.
Morgan State and at night. And of course, that's, the classroom with young people and everything like that. You well know your own self. It's inspiring because you can see young minds gathering and holding on to things and moving forward. So, that's,
Wow.
yeah.
So
That's
you, so
so
you go ahead. Go ahead. I'm not going to interrupt. Go ahead.
so now what I do, I moved to North Carolina to become special assistant to the chancellor here. So I was over in strategic planning, basically institutional effectiveness, and so on and so forth, at Fayetteville State University, which is a historically Black college and university. And I have retired twice. So, I'm not retired. I actually work for a Black owned consulting company, and we basically support historically Black colleges and universities. So I do program evaluations, grant writing, grant monitoring, training, administrative training, and so on and so forth for the historically Black colleges. And I have about 12 schools that I'm responsible for now.
Mm, mm. Wow. The there's so much here. There's so much richness. I just wanted to let you know that we're being joined by people, by family from Sudan, from Namibia, maybe even Nigeria. I see that name there, and the U.S. So people are joining in. They're coming in, and I hope that people will continue to stay and listen to this rich conversation about acknowledging the ancestors. But I want to go back to something else that you said. You've been Pan African for a minute, right? You said talked about the African Association of Africans in Minnesota and others. So you have been in this particular process of re-Africanization for some time, and that your children only knew about this re-Africanization and modified themselves once they went to college. Talk about what has it meant for you to be a Pan Africanist. Talk about the Nyerere Center and others.
It's a lonely road. Because at the time, I'm saying we're talking about in my coming into existence was probably as understanding myself as an African was probably 1968, 69, before
Hmm,
many of the people who are joining us were even born.
hmm.
And at the time, Lerone Bennett, do you remember Lerone Bennett and
Yeah, yes.
okay, I was at the time in South Bend, Indiana, and I attended a lecture that he and a couple of other sisters were doing, and at that point, it was like all of a sudden an awakening that said, hey, this is where I belong. This is who I am. So my mother had been a beautician. I went home and took the straightening stuff out of my hair. I took all my clothes and changed them, made dashiki dresses with matching
Wow.
earrings,
Wow.
and I was on my path, and I've never gotten off. It's
Mm.
that I found myself. I was looking for myself.
Hmm.
And then, of course, when I had the opportunity to go home to Tanzania, that I said, this is the place where I belong. I never felt that I belonged anywhere in the
Mm.
United States. But when I get to Africa, regardless of what country, I'm home,
Mm.
you
And that
know.
feeling of being home is really deep, right? People don't recognize being in a strange land or being estranged in a space because we learn to normalize this estrangement, and so this becomes what we come to believe is the totality of what it means to be human. But when you suggested you went to Tanzania, that you had an experience of being home, that's a spiritual phenomenon.
It was. And I'm saying, as the plane began to land and
Hmm.
I could see Africa for the first time, I mean, people told me, Mama, they would say, Mama, bring me some dirt back.
Hmm.
I want to be able to touch the land before I die.
Hmm.
And I'm saying, when I got off the plane, I did the same foolish thing that many Africans who are born outside of Africa do. I bent down, kissed the ground.
Hmm.
I cried
Hmm.
and everything because it was like my heart found itself.
Mm,
I was home. I never knew what it was like to belong to anything before.
mm,
And when I saw Africa, I knew that that was me. That's where I belonged. That's who I was. So it's like it's a complete awakening that people who live in Africa take for granted.
mm.
Okay, that outside it's hard for them to understand. I see there's a sister here, Olushola. I am Yeye. I am an Awo of Oshun. I have been initiated. I spend a great deal of time in Oshogbo. So, Ekaro, sister, Ekaro. And I am Motilewa Oshuniyi by all of my family there in Oshogbo.
There it is.
Okay.
The Pan Africanness all the way. We got the Ola. We have
Oluwala.
Olusala. We have they are here. Olu, the Olus are here.
Yeah.
Uh, Sibali is here. So this is a Pan African reunion, a festival. Let's talk about this idea of the organization Adasi. Tell us,
Mhm.
what is Adasi? What does the acronym stand for? And why is that organization so important to African people globally?
It is the African Diaspora Commemoration Institute. Now, Raymond, for you all in Nigeria, we do have an Adasi extension in Nigeria, and it pretty much was started by Bob Laos, who were there. We have an Adasi in Senegal, and we have a new Adasi in Brazil. We have so it is an African-centered organization that is not just centered in the diaspora, but we're also reaching out to the continent itself, basically reminding our people that our strength is and our empowerment is not only just recognizing who we are, but recognizing our spiritual relationship to the universe. And as our spiritual relationship to the universe, it takes us to our ancestors because they are closest to us. And drawing upon their previous experiences when they were here on this plane of consciousness and realizing that we have been promised a world without end and life everlasting, which means that when we transition, our ancestors, our people, our spirits are still living. The only thing that has happened is that the body has decayed and left, but the spirit continues on. And it is important. I mean, we started this organization out of DC, basically from dreams. Sister Eureka had a dream. The ancestors came to her, and saying they wanted to be commemorated. I joined because I ended up having a dream one night, and I saw myself going through this little bitty door. And when I went through this little door with everything that was dark behind me, I went down this plank. And when I got off onto some sort of a ship. And when the ship landed, I got off the ship and I was in the US. So I knew that that was my calling to be part of the organization, because what we are trying to do here is get our folks, our people across the world to understand the importance of what our ancestors have contributed to the world and continue to contribute regardless of where they may be. And the mere fact that as their children, as their descendants, as their spirits living on this plane of consciousness called the world, the earth, that they have to work through us and see us, and we have to work for them to elevate them to where they need to be. And they can assist us in doing so. I was formally trained, even though had been an administrator most of the time, I was formally trained in history. So my history experience is that of is Africa. And so understanding the historical significance of what we have contributed to the world helped then to shape what we're trying to do in terms of Adasi. We have a little booklet that we have put out, the Adasi Guide to Commemorating Our Ancestors. And basically, we ended up doing that because um, people kept asking us, well, what do we do? How do we do? And really, people, you end up asking you when what has happened is you've had a spiritual enlightenment and you have prayed for guidance. And when you get that information, then you're able then to pass it on. So when Adasi started in like 1992, I think it was, it's like a group of 6 or 7 of us sisters who have gotten together. We don't have a president. The only official office we have is treasurer, so we can keep track of money. We are a 50c3, which is a nonprofit organization. And we are incorporated in DC, in the University of in the District of Columbia. And basically, we started off trying to educate people about their relationship to Africa and helping them to understand who they are. Our greatest concern was intergenerational, to make sure that our young people understood that, because we recognized the impact that the media has and its influence on our people. And my own self, having supported brothers and sisters coming from the continent, and my house is where folks used to always stay. And I've had people to call up and say, Mama Tendai, so-and-so is coming. Can you pick them up at the airport? And I've gone to get people and brought them to stay at my house who I've never seen, didn't know anything about or whatever, because somebody I met in the continent said, Mama Tendai, somebody's coming. So one sister who is Igala from northern Nigeria came and stayed several years till she got on her feet, and I got her back in school and so on and so forth. So, my experience has been Africa's home, so people that are in Africa are my family. So when the family reaches out and asks for something, that's what we do. And
Wow.
basically, that's been the experience of Adasi. Like I said, with Adasi, we do all of our programs basically by African consensus. So it's 7 sisters. We are all very strong-minded. We've got, between all the sisters are professional in some way or another. And so when we put together a program, we kind of argue it out. Everybody brings their ideas, and in African consensus, we come to an agreement, and that's how we basically construct the programs that we do.
So the programs have actually been a part of my life. They helped me out tremendously when I was in DC, finished up my graduate work. I actually had a chance to attend one of the programs where Dr. Amos Wilson was one of the was a speaker in, and that's when I got a chance to meet him. And I was listening just today to the audio, and I thank you all for bringing him into my space to learn about him. And of course, I tracked him for a little while after that, and then shortly thereafter, he made his transition and became an ancestor. So the organization has been there in that regard, and also invited me to speak one time. I think that was one of my premier speeches about who we are as an African people. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's because you all gave me the platform that I was able to move forward. So again, thank you for the organization. We think about Adasa. We're here with Mama Tendai and the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute. Among other things, she is a Pan Africanist. She has been doing so since the 60s. She is still on the pathway to ascend to help us to understand who we are as a people. Many of the listeners coming in from Nigeria and other places have sent you great accolades. And so they're very much impressed with this process. We know that for our people, we learn that somehow to acknowledge ancestors is a bad thing. We hear from Europeans, especially about the voodoo and other things, and how that is incorrect, especially when we have Islamic governed spaces such as the Gambia and other places like that. There's this great disdain, a dislike, or lack of acknowledgement of the ancestors. What this idea of ancestral acknowledgement, ancestral worship, is this something spooky we should be afraid of, or is it something that we should really honor and acknowledge? Help us out, help us understand that in the African world.
Well, that's what I said. That's the importance of history in terms of understanding and using previous experiences to analyze your current situation. And so what I'm saying here is, when you brought up the word Vundoon, people don't understand that Vundoon came into existence because of basically the enslavement of African people coming through Benin. And they were coming from a number of different ethnic groups. Okay, so with those ethnic groups coming together with their own forms of spirituality, they ended up putting it together. So it became almost like a mixing bowl, a salad bowl of different spiritual systems, but with one aim. We are the first people on the earth to acknowledge that there's only one God. Okay, but many manifestations of God, and everything that lives has God in it. We're the ones who try to teach that sort of thing. And so for us to be able to become enslaved, and we're still enslaved everywhere, all over. African people are at the bottom. We are oppressed, even in our own countries. And so in order for that system to take hold, one of the main things that had to happen was to separate us from our strength. And our strength is our spirituality. So yes, we're still experiencing this issue. It's constantly. I mean, the whole concept, the idea of Christianity is an outgrowth, for example, of African traditional religious systems. Even though, for example, as I follow Ifa, there is still only one supreme God, but many manifestations. And in order for people to understand how the universe is put together, we basically personify, give earthly experience to help people to understand the spirituality and the spiritual realm in which we live. And so to separate us from that is to separate us from our strength. And if we are separated from our strength, then we accept anything and anyone. So I'm saying we accept whatever anybody wants to say. We don't analyze, we don't go back, we don't see the strength. And when we look at the major rebellions and things against the chattel enslavement of African people across the world, it was the spiritual people who started it or who maintained it. Even as we're talking, I saw somebody's from Kenya, the Maji Maji Rebellion basically was the spiritual people saying, here, I'm giving you magic water, the bullets will pop off of you, which they did, and they eventually won the Mau Mau. Okay, so yes, so the strength is in what we have lost.
So you're suggesting to us that by making us not see the power of spirit and
being afraid
people,
of it,
and being afraid of it, we can be perpetually controlled and manipulated by a population and weakened. But through acknowledging the ancestral aspect of who we are, we can be strengthened and we can be victorious. Is that what you're telling us?
I certainly am. That is the whole thing. Not only that, we have to acknowledge what our ancestors have gone through for us to be. If they didn't exist, we wouldn't be here. Okay, we are their extension.
mm,
We are their descendants, and we carry within us the same blood that they had.
mm. Many of us are not impressed by our ancestors, right? We talk about people even say that I'm not my ancestors, right? So that they're saying whatever they took, we're not going to take that line down. And so what do you think about that when you see this? It's like not this statement of I'm not my ancestors.
Well, the most one of the things that is has become very popular now is people trying to trace their DNA, and so the DNA says just the opposite. They are their ancestors.
Mm, mm,
Okay,
mm,
we are our ancestors. We have the same DNA, regardless of where we've been, regardless of how it may have been. How do you say, intermixed or whatever? That African DNA still shows. It is dominant, as you well know. Uh, we speak about it in terms of the sciences, and we know that black is dominant, brown eyes are dominant, brown skin is dominant, so it prevails.
mm.
And so, folk who say they're not their ancestors, some of them I have to just leave to the side, okay, because they don't want to change. They don't want to know. If anyone's ever seen The Matrix, remember there was a part in there where the man says, "I know this isn't real, but I'm going to deal with it because it's easier."
Mm,
Okay. And
mm,
that's basically where they are. They don't want to have to deal with the realities of accepting who they are because of the way that it's being portrayed. And you well know that even from when I was a child, I mean, I'm 78 now. So even as I was a child, we were dealing with Tarzan swinging through the trees and whatever, never realizing that the haircuts and the whatever. I mean, first of all, Tarzan was made in the Amazon, not in Africa. And so the portrayal of Africa, whether it's been in comics or the news or the whatever, has always been a negative one. When we would turn on the TV, even now in the evenings, what do you have? They find a child with where the flies are buzzing or whatever, and they land on their face, and here we are, poor little Africa. So no one wants to really actually acknowledge that they don't. Who wants to be a part of everything that is destroyed, that is demeaned, that is less than, and whatever? Wakanda, though, as you had mentioned to me, as a movie, even though many of my African friends, and we'll be celebrating the Nigerian independence here in Fayetteville this month, but they were very upset because Wakanda wasn't did not portray things as they are. And then I had to remind folks, this is a movie. But what is one of the first movies that portrayed Africa in terms of what it could be? And now we're looking at the futuristic cities that are being built and so on and so forth. We just want to make sure that everything that we do reflects Africa. And you see what I'm saying is one of the bad things that happened is people who have been westernized here in the Western culture always felt that they had knew more. So I'm gonna go home and teach the Africans. That was the whole idea with the missionaries. Okay, not recognizing the fact that that's where religion started. Okay, and so we have to kind of change the paradigm, turn it around for people to understand the creativity that I see when I'm on the continent. And brothers, I was in Nigeria in June this year. Um, the creativity that I see of my people at home who can create something from nothing demonstrates to the rest of the world the genius of African people. And one of the things, Mwata, I know that you also are at Grambling, is that I'm telling folk, and I know they're not hearing me. The reason why the money is now starting to come into the HBCUs is because we as an African people are the innovators. We are the creators. The Europeans are the synthesizers. So they need the African genius and the African creativity to be able to maintain dominance, world dominance. So here we are.
So there's, I mean, there's so much here. Thank you for that. I want to go back and acknowledge something that you said early on that I should have caught at that time. When you said that the origins of religion is out of out of Africa, right? So we know then that James, Dr. Smalls, others tells us about this idea of Christianity and other things. I want to go back. I just want to just highlight something that we have the Yoruba names that appear here. So we know then that missionaries could not have brought God to people, because we see that in this name, Raymond, we see Olu, which of course alludes to God, and
Mm,
Ola talks about wealth. So it's at some level talk about the wealth, the power, where God's wealth is, and also we see the same thing in Olusola, and we know that it is a combination of things. But I want to highlight this idea again, that there is God's and God's wealth in that particular name, and then even joined by our Igbo brother here, Chukwuemeka. And
yeah,
Chukwuemeka in Igbo means God has done great things. So we recognize then that there was no way that the Europeans could have brought a God concept to our people, when even implicit in the names that we give ourselves, we give reverence to that which is higher than ourselves, the idea of a God concept. So this speaks then also volumes to the power of a people who acknowledge ancestors and the divine, and not only the divine being outside themselves, but the divine within. So
Shay.
I just want people to just see, just here examples for us right before us, joining in all over the African world. And so when we talk about acknowledging the ancestors and acknowledging a spirit and spirituality, you're saying that is our source of power. We have in the United States coming up here really soon a spinoff of All Saints Day. We have Halloween, or some call a Hallows Eve or Halloween. And so people learn to be afraid of the spirits, the spiritual world, that is sort of trick or treat, the boo, where they're going to scare us. What's the reality of that? What's the myth in all of this issue of Hallows Eve and so forth, and
Well,
ancestral? Mhm.
what the Europeans ended up doing is making it into that. And they basically, it was a time in which they allowed folks to do all sorts of things that were not acceptable within society, and then the next day they prayed over it. So I'm saying, so it was, you can be a hellion on this day, and then tomorrow we're going to repent. So even implicit within that, we don't see our ancestors as that. We don't see our ancestors as ghosts. We see our ancestors as spirits that are around us and with us. I think it's Dr. Kwabena, Kwabena Kamene, who talks about the millions of ancestors who walk with us. Okay, because you're looking at the combination as you go back in history of your own particular family who came together to create you, and that the mere fact that if we truly believe that spirit is, it's like a light bulb. Okay, when the light bulb is turned on, that's the spirit in the container. When you turn the light off, okay, the container is there. Where did the spirit go? The electricity is still there. So that's the analogy I try to use sometimes for people to understand that spirit doesn't die. It's transformed, just like we have been taught. Okay, that energy does not die, it is transformed. And so we have to think about that when we think about our ancestors and our relationship. And I see someone has joined us from Ethiopia. And historically, when the Europeans were coming around into Africa and coming around and finally landed in Ethiopia this last time, they were appalled because they said that they were coming to bring Christianity to Africa, and they found the Coptic Christians in Ethiopia that were older than them. So basically, they ended up saying, well, then you guys have the wrong kind of Christianity because you're not following what we are following. Okay. And then it tried to impose their way again upon you.
There it
So,
is. There it is. Right. So when they got there, people were already acknowledging the divine. And so again, to our brother that joined us, we say Ndamara, to him from
mhm.
Ethiopia, to the Yoruba, we say Alafia, to the Igbo, we say Kedu, and so to the Kenyan would say Habarigani. We thank you all for being here and joining us. And so there's this conversation about uh, uh, ancestral acknowledgement. And so Europeans have bastardized the entire process and made it something spooky. And we know that in part because the Europeans were concerned about the children dying from disease, and so they found a way to appease the spirits, but because for them the spirits were evil, taking away things from them, and that is even how their Christian or God concept is about an evil force as opposed to a guiding force. And also we talk about the ancestors and talk about their proximity to the divine. And so talk a little bit about the I know the Yoruba system talks about the idea of the Orishas and talk about the God concept of the Akan, talk about the Nananom, that's a mouthful, or the Abasum. So talk
Mhm.
about this idea of ancestors and why they're so important to our divinity or our concept of God and our place in the world.
The most important thing is that they're the closest to us. They have most recently walked our path. And so it is logical to think that then our ancestors would remember their experience when they were in this life form. And so then they would better understand our trials and tribulations and be in position then to be able to assist us from the ancestral realm. And, you know, because we look at things in a hierarchy. We have the supreme, we have the Iromole, then we have the Orisha, and then we have the ancestors, and then there are us. And regardless of religion, each one says that was man was given dominion over the earth. So we have a responsibility in terms of taking care of that which has been given to us. But if we truly understand what how our African ancestors have seen life, they see God in everything that lives and breathes. It's just that they vibrate at different uh, was different vibrational levels. And so what we know scientifically now, when they used to tell us that rocks didn't have a vibration, they now know that a rock does have a vibration. So what I try to say to folk is a rock vibrates at a rock's vibration. That's what makes it a rock. And grass does the same thing. It vibrates at that level. We vibrate at a human level. And at a human level, we are also connected. All things that are living have God in them. So we are part of a spiritual concept. What we try to say in most of our African traditional spaces is that we are God having an earthly experience. Okay. We are the spirit of the supreme having an earthly experience. And it's through these earthly experiences that we grow and that we understand and that we can give solace and guidance into the direction of the world. And I'm saying right now, I know one of the brothers here had said something about Nigeria is basically the future. And I've been saying if we can get Nigeria together with the number of Nigerians there are in the world, if it can be get together like Ghana has called itself the Black Star, Nigeria should. We need to be that. We've just got to get over all these different ethnic differences so that we can move forward, because the North is wreaking havoc. But again, we have to look at how the countries as they exist now, why they exist the way that they do. Part of it is to create confusion among us.
So the idea
I'm
of
trying to read
confusion.
this. I want to
Go.
tell us. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. But I was allowing you to read it. I was going to talk. So the idea of confusion comes through what I'm hearing you say, spiritual disruption, right? So
Yeah.
if I can disrupt spirit, then I can then take the power away from a population. This is why this conversation is so important about ancestral commemoration. We're talking about the idea of knowing who we are, knowing that we are part of a system. You mentioned the layers that exist among the Yoruba. Others have very similar systems by
Hmm.
which we acknowledge that we are the descendants of those who would not die. The Congo concept even talked about the spirit is within all things. Janet Chang's book called what is it, Kintu. says that there is Hantu, Bintu, and others, and says that there's spirit in laughter, there's spirit in animals, there's spirit in rocks,
Yes.
and Muntu. That's the book Muntu, and spirit in
Mm-hmm.
humans. And so the divine is with all these things. These are things that our ancestors understood. And somehow we learn to vibrate at a very inhumane level. So on a level where we acknowledge our lowliness, that we talk about poor people and being poor in a developing country, and listen to the video today by Dr. Amos Wilson, and just he mentioned something about someone saying, "How can you exploit people who don't have anything?" Right. So in reality, then that you're going in getting something from people who are very wealthy, rich, but we just don't know that. So we are kept into the dark about our own wealth. And I would submit to you that our greatest wealth, as you were saying, that we are humans having an experience of being, I mean, we're spirits having an experience of being human, that we already are connected, and that the spirit that you felt when you flew over Tanzania, when you landed on the continent, is that same ancestral call. You say you feel at home because the land is from whence we've come, and the spirit, the essence, is there, and it says that you are home. I think that people have to really acknowledge that. Uh, um, our dear brother here from Ethiopia tells us about Christianity in ancient monasteries, and how it was practiced, and how it was fighting against colonialism. We need to understand the fundamental role of spirit and spirituality against the colonial powers. And you mentioned some of the earlier the Mau Mau movement and spiritualism. We also know that Boukman in Haiti
Yes.
was the one who sounded the drum. The spiritualists from who traversed, as some say, from Jamaica, but also we know he's directly from the continent. And so he was the one that pulled people together in Haiti to form the revolution to be victorious over the French. So this has been a long process. We see the same thing with Nat Turner taking the Europeanized Bible and liberating African people from their being held captive in the U.S. So this has been a long-standing issue of understanding the power of spirit and spirituality. Folks, we talk about an ancestral commemoration with Mama Tendai of Adasi. Mama Tendai, tell us, you brought the book up earlier. Tell us, what is it that we can do? How do we acknowledge ancestors in the context of being Pan-Africanists?
Okay, let me just first, I want to address the brother who put something up there from Ethiopia. And I want to say this. I don't know if you know the name of Haile Garima. He is a filmmaker here in the U.S. He came to the U.S. from Ethiopia, went to film school, and even my close friends who said that they have come from Africa and had to come to the United States to understand that they were Africans, to understand the Pan-African concept, to understand that they were linked to other Africans here, and what that has meant. Haile created a film called Sankofa. And Sankofa, if you all have not seen it, you need to see it. Sankofa was the very first film that was created that dealt with the enslavement of our people in the Western Hemisphere from our perspective. Every other film we have is someone who is not African. The one that he did talked about it from our experience, and he portrayed the experience from the sense and the lens of those who were being acted upon. Then he did a film on Ottawa, the Battle of Ottawa. I bring this up because Ethiopia has a historical claim of being the only country that was never colonized. And the Battle of Ottawa is one in which the Europeans thought they would not be able to hold on to Africa, because the Africans there during that battle, and I just need to throw this out, Queen Taitu started it with our own army because she did not think that the Europeans were being truthful about an agreement that had been written that her husband Menelik had signed. And once she investigated, found out that basically that the document that had been signed, there were two different versions. There was one version that was given to the Africans. There was another version that the Europeans gave to other Europeans. And the European version said that Africans were abdicating their authority and giving it to the Europeans to be able to speak for them on the international scene. That is not what Menelik had signed and agreed to. He thought it was basically a treaty. Anyway, the battle is important in that Africans with sticks and stones won. And the Europeans didn't think that they were going to be able to hold on to Africa behind that. So they ended up closing down and getting things, keeping it out of the media once they realized the impact that the media was having on it. I'm saying this because Haile interviews an elder who says in his film on the Battle of Ottawa that the Ethiopians did not understand the concept of colonization, therefore they refused to accept it. You hear what I'm saying? They didn't understand the concept, so they refused to accept it. That is you and your energy and your spirit saying, I'm coming for it. Now I'm going to win one way or the other.
Right, right.
Okay. And then the other thing too, in terms of that battle, we need to understand when we had these kinds of battles, especially it has been acknowledged and historically documented in Ethiopia, when they went to battle, the priests were with them. And they were in the background praying and chanting and calling upon the ancestors and the divine to support them. Africans didn't go to battle unless they prayed first to get support for the battle that would allow them to be able to go and become victorious. And that's what happened with the Battle of Ottawa. So I digressed. But I wanted to say that because it's an illustration of the power of the unseen. Okay. And we know that at that point, then Ethiopia couldn't be conquered.
So how do we because I mean we could go on about that whole narrative,
Yes,
and even what's going on now by Menelik and the deceptive nature of Europeans and all of that is again spirit disruption stuff that they do. But also you talk about the power of people to be able to have ritual prior to battle, ritual prior to engaging in activities, and that has been the source of the victory, and that has been the source of the control and power manipulation of the oppressor by saying that the way that you all are doing this is incorrect. You should do it the way I do it, which means in effect then that we are worshiping and honoring their God, and their God is being worshipped to oppress us. So by extension, we are honoring and elevating the oppression of ourselves. And so that's a long conversation.
yes.
But I want to ask the question of the first what I asked earlier about what do we do ritual? How do we acknowledge ancestors? What role do shrines or altars play and that kind of stuff? Is that some spooky voodoo stuff? Talk to us.
Yeah, that's something that we ended up developing. As I had said, Adasi started off as basically primarily an educational organization, but we also put an altar on the side of the little programs we're doing. What happened over time is that they became the focal point. So now in DC and other places, they refer to us as the altar ladies, and they call for us to create those. What we found is that we would have part of our program would always be a community, the building of a community altar. So we would ask people to come and bring things. Now, why is it not spooky? Every church has an altar. Every church. I don't care who it is. When we come, there's always what's referred to as an altar call. And people come to some place or something that is considered a focal point to say their prayers. And so when I help folk to understand about creating an altar, that's all it is. It's a focal point, a place where that allows you to say, as we say, wusa, to take a moment and say, let me be quiet. Let me sit here. Let me organize myself. Let me put my thoughts together. Let me put my prayers together. Let me try to reach out and communicate with something that is greater than me to help me make these decisions and to guide me. in what I have to do and to the challenges that I am facing at this time. So, as a focal point, if you can just think of it as that, it can be created anywhere and in any form. When our ancestors were running away, when they were running away from the plantation and running away from enslavement, two things they used to do. If they got into the swamp, the wood, or whatever, they created some kind of a little monument, some kind of a little thing. And I recognized what that was when I went to Benin. They would create, and basically they'd take a little mud and make a mound, or they would do something with a tree. They needed to focus so they could find out what they needed to do. And why did they need to focus? If you're running away in a strange place where you've never been before, you have nothing but the clothes on your back, and you are by yourself, you need some help, or you feel like you need some help. And because our ancestors at that point were closer to spirit, they reached out to spirit in the way that they had done when they were at home in Africa to get guidance. And we know historically that, for example, even in Virginia, they called it the Dismal Swamp, even though they don't want to talk about it. At any given time, there were at least 100 runaway encampments or maroon societies that had developed as a result of that. We have it all. We have them all over the U.S. And when I was doing my writing and my studying, I researched and found, and basically my comment was, wherever there was enslavement, there was rebellion, there was resistance, there were runaways, and there were maroons everywhere. So our people always have had that desire to be free, but the altars themselves are basically just a focal point, a place that allows you to rest, a place that lets you feel as though you have something physically that helps you to be able to focus yourself, to reach out and to go within, to communicate, to use the God within to reach the God outside.
So what do we do? So we have these the altars or shrines. They're not spooky. You all have been called the altar ladies, and we have called upon you as Association of Black Psychologists and others to assist us with this process of connecting. Tell people what to do specifically, right? What does a Pan African acknowledgement look like? I know that we've done this, but I just wanted people to hear about this. We know
Okay.
that every what is it in the summer in June
The
there's
second week of June,
okay
we
there's
also helped to organize a group called ICAMP, what is the International Commemoration. So what we try to do is all organizations, we've been bringing more and more in, all organizations who have any kind of a commemoration ceremony come together on the second Saturday in June to try to commemorate our ancestors, to acknowledge them, and to try to use, it's two C's, ICCAMP. To commemorate them so that we can collectively, we believe there's strength in numbers. We believe there is strength in a number of prayers going up at the same time, and the same thing in terms of reaching out. And I just want to dispel this whole myth about the spookiness behind it, because all of us go past altars every day that we are on the road going somewhere, because there is a European statue somewhere, and that is an altar. That is a commemoration. It is a reminder of what they're saying, of their glory, of their victory, of their whatever. And so we need to then take that same idea and commemorate that within our own households, and to have a reminder, which is an altar, a reminder of days that were better, and a reminder of how we can reconnect, a place, like I said, of quiet where we can also lay our burdens down, because all of us are stressed in some way or another, pained in some way or another, and are addressing issues in some way or another. So the idea of our altars, basically, I tell people to say a prayer before you get ready to build one, and allow yourself to be guided to develop what you want. But the simplest little thing we tell folks, we use white as the undergird, whatever it is that we're going to do. And why do we do it? Not because we think white is superior, but white is the absence of color. So then it's closest to spirit because it doesn't have any color. We're trying to create a spiritual sense. And then we ask folks to think about what if you're going to think about your grandparents or your mother or your father, your aunties and uncles and cousins who have passed, did they have any particular colors that they like? Put those on the altar. Put your pictures on there. So when you're sitting there, you can have a reminder. Grandma, you did this and you used to tell me that. What did it mean? I'm going to pray to you. I'm going to ask you for your guidance. I'm going to ask you for your intervention to help me through this thing that I'm going through right now. So we use that. And then, of course, we put things because we're looking at water. So I always tell people you got to put a glass of water on there because we think of water as a neutralizing force, water as the essence of all living things, water as 70% of what makes up our body. So there's a connectedness there. And then I usually suggest people put a candle or some kind of a light on there. Why? Because if somebody's coming to visit you in the evenings, do you not put a light out so that they can see that they're coming to the right house? So it's an invitation to say, come. Okay, here's the light. Come to this space. So, of course, then what we want to do is acknowledge the livingness of them. So I always say, put something that's living, a plant, a flower, or something of that nature on your altar also to remind you that as you are saying your prayers, as you're sitting there in contemplation, as you're reaching out and asking for help, and then saying, some of you all weren't so good, so let me pray for you as I ask you to come and help me. We want to make sure that we have something, like I said, that is there, that is living, that is reminding you of them. And then we're asking you to just take a moment. I mean, it's a reminder, just like going past those statues. So you don't have to get on your knees and pray and whatever every day, but you need to have something there. And as we developed as an organization, doing these altars on the side, the altars kept growing. And one of the main ones, I did an altar for NCOBRA. That is the National Reparations Organization that started here in U.S. that is connecting with reparations groups throughout the diaspora. Jamaica and them are really strong in terms of trying to get the British to do that. Reparations just means repair. And we know that we need to be repaired on both sides of the water. I want to give you an example. When I was in Benin, I saw that on the weekends, people would go to the ocean and stand there and just look out at the ocean. They had forgotten why they were doing it. But the reason why they started doing it centuries ago is because they were looking to see if folk were coming back. They were looking for the ships to come back to bring the children back, even though they weren't of their own ethnic groups. And I need my people to stop taking responsibility, because the first thing that folks want to say, because they don't want to give reparations, is that, well, Africans sold other Africans. Historically, understanding there was no Africa. If you can understand World War I and World War II, where white folks were fighting white folks, you ought to be able to understand what happened with Africans, who the majority of them who came out of Africa and into the diaspora were prisoners of war. So they were not people selling their own ethnic groups, their cousins and aunties and whatever, but people who were their enemies at the time. So getting back in terms of the altars themselves, as I had said, they grew. What we ended up seeing is we would have a moment in which we would tell people, if you've brought something to put on the altar, please come forward. So it is almost like an altar call. We would do that during our programs. And people started bringing things from their relatives that they wanted to commemorate, and they put it on the altar. And then we saw people starting to kneel in front of the altars and pray. Some of them ended up crying. I mean, it became an emotional thing that we began to understand the power of this physical thing that we were creating. And now it has become a primary reason why people call upon our organization, and it is to create these edifices that commemorate all sorts of things. So we do them. People will sometimes ask us to create it, even, for example, for a wedding. because they want their ancestors to give their blessings. So we will create the altar at the reception. So just don't limit your thoughts in terms of it having to be just like a churchified thing, but rather something that is assisting you.
Hmm. So we're talking about setting up altars, the shrines to acknowledge those that have gone before us, those that are with us around us, because we know that the ancestors are always ever present. You mentioned about the light and the candle, the lamp, the fire, the light is within. We have gone over our time today,
I'm so
but
sorry.
it just been no, it's been great. I didn't want to ever stop the flow, but because there's so much richness here and there's so much to be discussed, and so there's so many elements of history that you have mentioned. Is there anything that you want to say in closing for our listeners?
I was going to share something that we have in here in our book, and it's our dedication. It says that Adasi and our guide is dedicated in the loving memory of the millions of our African ancestors, men, women, children, and babies who were kidnapped, trafficked, and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean. Those who perished in the Middle Passage, which we refer to as the Ma'afa. We may not know your names or your faces, but your spirit lives in us and among us. Your lives were cut short, your dreams vanished, your loved ones taken, never to return. We are the descendants of those mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, sons, and daughters who perished, and those who survived. We're the ones who refused to die. Today we honor you. We remember you. We live, you live in us. We are you. Your DNA is in our blood, in our veins, passed on from generation to generation. We cannot forget you. We must remember you. We will honor you by remembering you. We will honor you by healing your pain, our pain. We will honor you by restoring your name, your dignity, your humanity, thereby restoring ourselves. We will remember you by being the best that we can be as a people of African descent. We will remember you in loving who we are and loving each other. We will remember you by reclaiming who you were and who you are as the mothers and fathers of all human beings. And we will remember you for the richness and greatness that you have given to the world. We will remember you. We will always remember you.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. That was indeed powerful. That is in the book. How can we get a hold of that book? Right? How do we get? Yeah, how do we get that?
Oh, Baba, at our website, you can purchase the book. We'll mail it to you. It's $10 and shipping plus the shipping and handling. So
What is
in this hemisphere, it ends up being $12.
what
Now
is the website address?
www.african adasiancestors.net.
Okay. Okay, that is how you catch up with the organization www.adasi,
And
A.
ADACI
Mhm.
ancestors. Or you can, and there's also an adasi.org.
Okay.
So it's that same. Here we go.
Okay. Got it right here.
Okay.
So that is how we catch up with the organization. Thank you again so much for taking out the time to be here in this trying moment of the
Sorry, Baba. Take net and put go org org.
org there.
Mhm.
We can do that. So the organization.
They'll be able to see the various kinds of programs that we have done too, because we've been trying to do a number of healing programs in which we have invited you as well
Mhm.
to address our current and past traumas. It's part of our efforts to repair our people.
The repair is so important. You mentioned, of course, the term. Oh, that's still wrong. You mentioned the repair process. We recognize that reparations does indeed mean repair, and so people think that often it means just simply money. But why is the repair so important?
Because we're still experiencing the trauma of it by the way we live. When we look anywhere across the continent, anywhere in the world, African people are at the bottom of the social societal realm. And we don't even understand some of the trauma we're experiencing. We now know that many of the diseases that we experience are related to our past trauma. Um, our relationships with each other have deteriorated, and that's part of the existence of the trauma. And so we ourselves are trying to find ways in terms of how do we repair ourselves, our relationships with our children, with our elders, and so on and so forth has deteriorated because we've lost ourselves in terms of culture. So all of those things need to be repaired. So
Mm,
monetary is only one piece of it. You know,
mm-hmm,
how do you restore a continent that you're continuing to rape?
mm,
Every group that has come to Africa out that have not been Africans have come to Africa to extract its wealth. Originally, we were the wealth. Now it's the gold, it's been the diamonds, it's all the minerals, it's all of everything that the world needs to operate in a modern technological society. The how do you say, the foundation of all of that is in Africa. The raw materials that makes the world run come from there. And yet our people suffer.
mm, mm,
So yes, that's the repair and understanding and taking charge of what belongs to us. Africa belongs to African people.
mm. We have gone over, y'all, but it's not been empty. And thank you all for coming in and going and coming back again. And those who will see this will, I'm sure, be enlightened tremendously by all that has been said, because there have been no words wasted. That we have talked about the importance, the relevance of acknowledging the ancestors, to understand that that is a key to our power source that we have to plug into. Those that have gone before us, whose blood runs through our veins. We acknowledge the fact that we are the children of those who would not die. We
I'm
acknowledge
sure.
also the fact that the individuals that come in to exploit the land understand the value and worth of the land and the people therein. We have to acknowledge our own value. I acknowledge the fact that we have come from a great and mighty people. We're not saying they have everybody's been perfect. We're simply saying everybody is great and mighty. That every time you go around a circle in Washington D.C., a statue of a European, it is a shrine and or
Mhm.
altar. We have the obligation and duty and responsibility to create the altars and shrines for ourselves. If we have a experience of being in a religious organization that acknowledges a Europeanized version of a divinity, then it is not really elevating us in consciousness as to who we are as African people, because we are the originators. Mama Tendai told us of what we consider to be so-called modern religion, that we come from a tradition of Yoruba, of Orishas. We come from Akan. We come from a variety of organizations or groups of people who understood the power of the divine. So we do not have to go to devilish people to understand our divinity, and we have to discontinue that. This has been a part of this conversation today. The idea of ancestral commemoration for African empowerment, to be empowered to know that the divine is within. We want to again thank Mama Tendai for being here with us, taking our time to come and to share so much. This is the Pan African Leadership Center. I am Dr. Mwata Kairi Sankara, also known as Kevin Washington European name, and we will continue to elevate consciousness among our people. And we say to you, in any language, we will say to you that. Uh, 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 Give me the Yoruba. I lost the Yoruba all of a sudden. I got Hotep, um,
Modupwe Pupo.
Ma- Madukwe,
Modupwe Pupo.
Madukwe. We
Thank
give
you
thanks.
very much.
We give thanks and praise. Nantie among the Akan to stay well. We say to all of our African people to know who you are and know the power that is within. Ashe.
Ashe.